Hey Podcast Babe, welcome to season 9 of the Podcast Babes podcast. My name is Anna Klasse, host of this pod and founder of the Podcast Babes. Every week, I interview and inspire a female podcaster here who has made her podcast work for her and her business. So tune in to learn from her mistakes, create your own profitable podcast. Here's today's episode. Hey Podcast Babe, welcome to another episode. Today I'm here with Amber Lilyestrom. She is a brand and business coach for female entrepreneurs, specializing in mindset, marketing, sales, and messaging. She's also the host of Ignite Your Dream podcast. And I'm really excited to have you here today, Amber. And your podcast, you have so much content. I believe it's like over 500 episodes. You have so many reviews, so many downloads. So I'm so excited to share a little bit about your podcast journey with our audience today. First of all, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, me too. So to kick us off, can you tell us a little bit more about what Ignite Your Dream is all about?
Yeah. So of course, I primarily support female entrepreneurs and so, our businesses are typically our dreams. And so I kind of focus on the journey of the dream. I'm really quoted a lot with the saying, if the dream is in you, it's for you. And I really, really believe that the dreams that we have in our life can serve as our life direction and our path. And so we talk about the anatomy of a dream. We talk about all of the, challenges that come with following our dreams and living our dream lives and, everything that comes with it. And so it's really inspiring and it's really truthy and honest. And I love podcasting. I think it's such an amazing medium.
Yeah, me too. I'm slightly biased, but
Yeah.
absolutely. So when you started the podcast, it's already a while ago, obviously. Did you already have your business? What came first, the podcast or the business? Can you talk a little bit more about that launch phase of your podcast and what that looked like?
Yeah. So I started my business in 2014. And then I launched my podcast shortly thereafter in 2016. I think it was like April of 2016. And I've recorded an episode pretty much every single week ever since then. So that's a long run when we're talking, September 2024 at the time of this conversation. And it just felt like a natural next thing for me to do. I think it was a different time for podcasting than it is now too. It was a little bit earlier on and it was kind of like a new medium that people were weaving into things in a certain way back then, even though it was like not that long ago, but it feels like it was a million years ago. And yeah, so it was just sort of like an actual progression of the next thing I was going to do. And one of the things I learned very quickly that has just become such a huge game changer for me is that, podcast interviews are a way to have conversations with people that you would never have access to. And I have developed incredible relationships and connections with authors that I absolutely love, fellow business owners, and just incredible, incredible creators through my podcast. So I'm really grateful for that vehicle because it has just been such a catalyst for me in my business in many ways.
Yeah, it's such a great network builder, right?
Mm.
And it's so true what you said. Like, probably without this podcast, we wouldn't be sitting here chatting today, right? And I couldn't ask you all these questions about your podcast and then also share it with other people. I mean,
Right.
how awesome is that? It's just such a win
Yeah.
in and of itself. So that's so interesting that you started your podcast in 2016. Like in podcasting years, that's a lifetime ago. Like
Yeah.
the
Right.
landscape looked so different
Yeah.
back then.
Yeah.
So when you launched it, how did you do that? Because I also think, knowing like I started in working in the podcast industry in 2018. So I don't know what it looked like exactly in 2016, but I know like in 2018, it was in some ways a lot harder to launch a podcast because there was just not that much information available. It was not as accessible
Mhm.
as it is now, also in terms of um AI tools that can help
Oh, yeah.
you
Yeah.
and
We
like
were writing those
all.
show notes.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly.
Yes.
So how did you do it?
Yeah. Well, honestly, I did it all myself. Well, now that I think back to it, I haven't even thought about this in a million years. I did it all myself. I created my own graphic. I wrote my own show notes. I recorded my episodes on Zoom. I learned GarageBand and how to do the audio cuts and all that stuff. And I just did it, and asked my husband for a little bit of help. And at the time, he was a police officer. Today, my husband is a podcast producer. So,
Oh, wow.
podcasting is an important thing in our family, and he has, a handful of clients that he does all of the things that I just said, basically, that most people don't wanna do. So, yeah, and so I just did it myself, and I brailled my way through it. I learned as I went. I figured it out, and what I realized quickly on was, consistency and continuity were really important, not just for my listeners, but, like, just to make sure that I would do it, and so I had that goal, and I release my new episodes on Tuesdays. I quite love that because that's the day that books are released, and so since I interview lots of authors, I can have their podcast live on their book release day and be part of the party, and it's just worked out really well for my team and the back end support that we just know our shows go live on Tuesdays, and so that's how I did it, and I will say this, I also have changed the name of my podcast, I think, like, 4 times, 3 or 4 times, over the course of all of those years and rebranded it, um, and, each time I've done that, it's been sort of like a new evolution of myself, but you can literally, like, go all the way back and you can hear the different names throughout the life cycle of the show, and, I don't think that, I always feel like people think that's very liberating when I say that. It's just not that big of a deal, I think you've just gotta let the medium itself and then you as the host, the person who's having these conversations for the reason you're having them, be the through line, and that to me has been, a very powerful focal point, I think, in my podcasting journey.
Yeah, it sounds like such a big thing for so many people. Like, oh my God, I'm going to change the name
Yeah,
of my podcast,
yeah,
right? And, in some ways, it can be a lot of work if you have to change a lot of links and stuff
yeah,
and graphics and things like that. But then also, in some ways, maybe it also doesn't have to be a big thing, like, depending on how much
yes,
work, like, do graphics have to be updated everywhere? You probably don't want broken links anywhere. Yes, okay, that's important. But other than that, it sounds like you still have the same intros and outros and stuff like that in your previous episodes, and
yep,
that's fine,
it's
right?
totally fine. Yeah, I'm not gonna go back and change it, because I think in so many ways too, like, that was what it was then, and so it actually would be weird to then go back and I don't know, it feels like there's something authentic about it, and I'm not trying to, like, cover my trail, and I will share, this is, I've only shared this, like, in program spaces, but one of the names that I had the trademark for it and, like, had the US certificate from the USPTO, and then I basically had it, like, taken from me, and somebody,
Mhm.
saying it wasn't even the same term, but they were just assertive, we'll put it like that, in their trademarking journey, and it wasn't even the same word, it was, like, a different thing, and I just said to the universe, I was like, "Oh, okay, well, apparently that's not what my show's supposed to be called,"
Yeah.
and, I mean, I had the certificate, I have it, that says that I have the trademark, and it got kind of taken out from under me, and so, what I learned from that was just don't put your stake in the ground with, like, the one word being the be all end all of everything, the end of the day. Then I went from there, I went to the Amber Lilyestrom show because I was like, "I'll try to take that." And then after that, I think that's when I went to Ignite Your Dream next, and, I just was ready to, like, have it not I don't know, I just had this moment of, like, not wanting it to just be my name anymore, and I wanted it to, like, create a movement of something, and so next year, I'm actually gonna be doing a live event here in the States called Ignite Your Dream
Mm.
Live, and, I'm excited. I'll be doing some live podcast interviews, but, it will be, like, a bigger scale event for my whole community at large, and, I haven't done a live event. I had 500 people at my last one in 2019, and it's been a bunch of years, since the pandemic,
Yeah.
to step back on stage and do a big event like that, but this time it's gonna have my podcast as the title, so I'm excited about that.
So cool. That's amazing. And that's also really interesting, like your podcast audience who has been listening to you. They've been listening to you, and you're in their ears every week
Yeah.
for so many years, sometimes,
Yeah.
right? They get to then meet you in person, be in person at this event. That's such a cool opportunity from a listener perspective as well, but also for you, like, you get to see the people who
Yeah.
listen to your show
Yes.
or who are receiving your emails, and like, I think that's so cool.
Do you ever
And
feel like that sometimes, Sam, that you're like, "Okay, like, it says that there's all these people listening, but, like, where are you?" I don't know,
yeah.
and so I'll just say this on behalf of you, those of you that are listening to the show right now, please DM her. DM her and say, "Girl,
Yes.
I'm listening, high five, peace sign, whatever." But just, like, it's proof of life, I feel like it's so meaningful when somebody and I had got a message yesterday from a woman in Estonia who's been listening to my podcast, and she's like, "Unbeknownst to you, I was on a Mind Valley podcast, and she heard me there, and then she came over to my show." She's like, "And I listen to your podcast every week religiously. You have no idea of this. I'm like an ocean away, and I just love hearing your voice and hearing your show." And, one interesting fact about my show is all of my solo episodes I record walking outside. And, that's a little different, it's a little you can hear birds and you can hear my dog's feet in the leaves and my feet in the gravel. I live on a dirt road, and I mean, I live in the forest, and so it's a big part of my life, and so I feel like I'm just talking to a friend, like on a voice memo, recording these episodes with my listeners, and people tell me they love it, and I just think and my husband's an amazing engineer and producer, so he makes it so that it sounds good. And I've learned little things like, okay, about the sound if a car goes by, which is rare, but sometimes cars go by, and how long to pause, and, all of that to make his editing a little bit easier. But yeah, it's such a like, see the long game to my fellow podcasters, like, I know that we've gotta think about the day to day and what your next show is gonna be about and all these things, but when you think about the relationship with your listener, when you think about what you just said, they're, like, listening to you in their earbuds when they're driving in traffic or when they're, like, folding the laundry, and they're in these intimate, quiet moments of their life, which is very, very precious. Like, what do you wanna talk about? Like, what would be helpful? What do you wanna say? And when you think about it from that angle, I think, at least for me, it grounds me in to that connection, and it helps me access more of, what feels more, meaningful to be talking about on my show.
Yeah, exactly. And it's what you said, like in your hosting platform, you can probably see, oh, this amount of people, like this, there's this number, right? Like,
Yeah.
okay, download number X. But I think it's so easy to just get caught up in, okay, I want more listeners and I want more downloads and
Yeah.
more and more and more. But
Yeah.
if you think about it, like these are actual people who are listening to your voice like throughout this like long form content as well, like,
Right.
okay, maybe not everyone listens to the entire episode, but like many people will. And how powerful is that? And I think if you see it like that, for me, this has made a big difference. Like since I switched my mindset to that, it's easier to keep going because
Yeah.
okay, sometimes sure, it feels like no one's listening because you're used to see this number, whatever it is. Like it doesn't matter if it's 10, 100, 1,000 or million, but if the number is often the same and you don't see massive growth or you don't see the podcast, take off immediately, then, like sometimes it's like, oh, why am I doing this? Maybe I shouldn't. But if you think of it like this,
Yes.
then it's so powerful and
Mhm.
then it's just easier to keep going as well. Has that been a big part of it for you as well? Because you've been doing this for 8 years, right? That's
Mhm.
so long.
Mhm.
So can you talk a little bit more about like how how did you do it? Like what keeps you going?
Yeah. It's just so my habit now, it's just so like such a part of what I'm creating and what I'm doing. And, I also think that like you just never know when that one person's gonna hear it that really, really needed to hear it. And that could be like Oprah, it could be a person who's like really having a hard time in their in their life, that really, really needed the hope of what you were offering. And so I think it's because of the sort of identity I hold with myself as a leader and as somebody who has a voice that can help people and who really truly truly believes that our dreams will save the world. I really think if every single person in your life decided to turn their entire life towards living out their dreams, the level of fulfillment in humanity would get so much higher, and people would stop with the unnecessary suffering in many ways, and they would turn away from hurting each other and blaming each other, and they would take radical personal responsibility for creating the life they wanna be living. And so I know that my show is part of that movement, and that's the mission, so it just feels really, really important to continue to have these conversations.
Yeah, you have a clear goal and vision for the podcast. It sounds like for sure.
Yeah.
Over the past 8 years, you already mentioned like the podcast changed a lot, right? It changed names several times. Um, you've learned how to make these solo episodes work for you and for your audience. What other changes have you made over the past 8 years?
My intro is like 10 seconds long. I one thing I just thought, "Who cares? I don't need to tell you all these things. I just wanna have a cool song, and I wanna just say, like, 'Let's go.'" And so I wanted to sorta, like, do the rich roll thing of just having, like, this really tiny little intro, and I wanted to, um, just be more cool about it, just be more, like, chill about it, and let it just be part of, you know, the brand at large and really, like, match my energy and not do anything that feels obligatory. And so
Mhm.
I really have this thing where, if you're doing something from obligation rather than inspiration, I'm not really that interested in it. It's just not gonna be very fun. Like, if you feel like you have to come to the party or you have to be at the event or it's like, gross. That's boring, babe, you know? Like, I wanna feel inspired to talk to you today, and I do, I was looking forward to this. Um, I don't wanna do anything that feels obligatory because what that means is you are adhering to some set of rules that's governing your life that doesn't feel like you're at choice with it, and so I think from an evolutionary perspective, personally, I just don't do stuff I don't wanna do anymore. And if there's something like I have to do, I gotta go to the dentist or whatever, things like that. Um, yeah, I find a way to get inspired around it. I find a way to like, okay, cool. Like that's how we're gonna approach what it is we're doing. And so if something feels like it has obligation, like that dread kind of heavy energy in it, I just don't do it. I edit it. I change my approach to it. I have an evolutionary look at it. And so I think from my podcast perspective, because it's so easy to go, oh, and I think my podcast actually this year has like gone down in listenership. And I looked at that one day and I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then I was like, yeah, well, whatever. Who literally, who cares? Who cares? The
Yeah.
people that here's my question. Okay. This is really good for you guys. If you see metrics that feel kinda gnarly and it doesn't you're like, "Ooh, I should maybe think about that." My question to you is, what would you change? Like, would you change those episodes that you've recorded already that you felt really good about when you hit publish? If the answer is no, then rock on, babe. Honestly, like this is about living sovereignty and we are in charge of our podcast. We get to decide. I'm an artist. I'm a poet. I've written poetry books. I'm writing my second one. I'm a business mentor. I'm not going to talk about things in the sort of like normal, slick way that you're used to hearing things in this space. I'm not. I'm going to bring you into looking at yourself. It's not always comfortable. And what I understand is that might feel like less resonant for some of the people that have been part of my community for a while, and I'm completely okay with that because I wouldn't change a thing about the emails that I'm writing, posts that I'm putting on Instagram, and the podcast that I'm recording.
Yeah. I think the problem is if you change how you show up because you want to make sure, things resonate with an audience, then you're not showing up as yourself. So then when people listen to the podcast and then they think, "Oh, well, Amber is so cool. I want to work with her," but then they jump on a call with you and you're this completely different person.
Yeah.
They're like, "What's going on here?"
Yeah.
Right? Like given it's basically fake advertising.
It's incongruent. Yeah, and it feels
Yeah.
terrible. Yeah, it feels really
Yeah.
bad. Mhm.
And you want to filter people. I
Yeah.
also think an important mindset shift that probably, all podcasters have to make is that more listeners is not necessarily better if they're not aligned with what if they don't if we're not they're not aligned with your brand, right? Like
Right.
more is not better. Maybe you just want to focus on the people that are already there and serve them really well and nurture those relationships instead of just focusing on growing your podcast as much as possible, as fast as possible, which is kind of what we're used to, right? Like
Mhm.
when you start something like a podcast, okay, it needs to take off and growth as much as possible, as fast as possible. And let's go. As many people as possible need to listen to this content. But sometimes that doesn't have to be the goal. I think it also depends on what your goal with the podcast is. But a very powerful way to use podcasting, I think, is to use it as a channel for your existing audience
Yes.
to show more of yourself and of your personality and of your style of working with clients, especially if you're a mentor or a coach or a service provider. Like, how powerful is that?
Yeah, and it's so much easier for people to join programs because they built that relationship with you. And, I've seen a lot of success with that over the years. It's sort of ebbed and flowed in different seasons in terms of um, when there were high conversions from podcasts, but it's always one of the primary mediums that people find their way into my Ignite Your Business membership or my Elevate Mastermind or any of the things that I'm doing. They're like, yeah, I listen to your podcast. I listen to basically like every episode. And it just deepens that connection so that when you get to the work, it's actually more fun too, because we've already been working on it before, we were working on it. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think I just am such a super fan of podcasts. And I think the other thing is you're just really meet yourself. And if you're somebody who wants to be a speaker, you're somebody who wants to go on stages, you want to be on more podcast interviews, have your own podcast because it is going to reveal to you, as you know, very quickly all of these insecurities and all of these things and all these idiosyncrasies that come up and essentially your relationship to them, and it's going to help you work on yourself. And that's just unequivocally true. And I'm a better speaker 100% because of my podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you cannot expect to start a podcast and all of a sudden be a master interviewer, for example. You have to practice. And if you're not very good at it, probably other people won't invite you to do something like that, like speaking or interviewing for them. So honestly, the easiest way to do it, to get better at it, is just to start your own thing. Yep. Practice, practice, practice. You'll get better. And then it's so much easier to be a speaker at events or
Mhm.
interview for other people, like to use that experience then to your advantage in your career, in your business. I absolutely agree. It's such a powerful tool for that. Okay, Amber, if you can give a starting podcaster one piece of advice, what would it be?
Don't be afraid to do it differently.
Mhm.
And what I mean by that is, really go inside to think about like what do I like to listen to? What kind of interview conversation do I want to listen to? And one of the things that I do in interviews is I don't do this whole origin story. Tell us how you got started. That whole thing that everybody does on podcasts with people. And I hear from the people on my show so over and over and over again. You ask me questions nobody has ever asked me before.
Yeah.
I will be like in their book on page 136 on line 10 going, this line right here, this moved me. You know, Prepare for your interviews and meet your people because everybody on the planet wants to feel like they matter. They want to feel important. Even people who you think are important.
Yep.
They live inside the jar. And so when you do something that's out of the ordinary, that's not the normal, podcast tour asking the same questions, yada, 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 and you connect intimately with them in a way, I promise you that relationship is going to blossom in ways that you probably couldn't even imagine. You're going to make connections with people. But I think it takes some courage on our side of the microphone to be bold enough to go there and to ask those questions with people. And I'm an excellent interviewer. I go the extra mile with people. I go in to like really understand them and I edify them in really meaningful and sort of unique ways. And I have people who've helped me with so many things that have been on my podcast because we get off the air and they go, "That was remarkable. I've never had an interview like that before." And they're like sort of in shock a little bit, which I kind of am always I kind of think is funny. And, because they're like, "Who's this girl?" And then they're like, "What can I do to support you in your work?" And that
Yeah.
question comes up more times than I can count, and I really think it's because of this desire to really connect. And so I'm gonna just say this to you guys, like, it doesn't matter who is on the other side. Connect, 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 and make it fun and different for the person you're talking to, and I promise you your listeners will get a lot of value from that too.
Absolutely. I think a way to do this is also to be very present in your interviews. I've had some interviews where I was the guest, and it feels very different if there's a list of questions and the host just like
Yeah.
goes,
Oh, yeah.
question one, question two, question three. Okay, great. This is your answer. Here's my next question. Versus having a conversation. There's a question. you go into that and then there is a follow-up question, or the host shares their own experience about this topic. And then, maybe sometimes there is no question, it's just a sentence and it ends. And then the other person just, organically, naturally picks up the conversation from there. And I think that's scary because you cannot plan for that, right? You have to be in the moment, in the conversation, and really focus to be able to do this.
Mm,
It's easier to just have a list of questions and just go question by question. But I do think like really good content, and it stands out then automatically as well.
yeah.
Your story also made me think of an interview that I did with this very successful startup CEO, and he had been on so many different, it's not this podcast, my other podcast. He had been on so many different podcasts, and his interviews were always kind of the same. Like I listened to a few of them, and they were always, I mean, it's the same story that he tells because the questions were literally the same questions.
Yeah.
So he came on my podcast and I was like, I don't want to create this piece of content that basically already exists tenfold, you know? So I was like, okay, well, I want to ask him something else. So instead of talking a lot about the company, I asked him about him, So he obviously like the conversation started. He told about the company. I was like, great. So how was that for you? And he was like, oh, okay. So like he told a lot about himself, and it became this pretty personal interview. And when he came on this call at first, he was a little bit grumpy. He was not like he was like so obviously not excited
Yeah.
because it's the same thing that he tells, everyone
Like,
every
here we
day.
go again, right?
Here
Yes.
we are again, He didn't care about me, my podcast, because it's the same thing. And at the end of the podcast, he was like, "Whoa, I haven't told these stories in ages. Thank you so much for asking."
Mhm.
I was like, yeah, I think you can also hear that in these interviews when people are excited to tell their stories instead of, oh yeah, here we go. Like this is just same, same, same.
Yeah, 100% when you're the zag in somebody's day. And
Yeah.
I love it. I take it as a challenge. I'm a former Division I soccer player. I played in college, and so, I'm like, "Give me the ball, let's go." And I wanna like, I'm gonna put it in the back of the net right now, and I just love it. I love watching people's energy shift. I love them being surprised. I love kinda going in there, and I will also tell you, there are times where you do try to do that, and they don't want to, and they fight it, and they kinda keep it here, and it's so funny because my husband and then also my, wing woman, Kristen, who helps with the podcast, she'll be like, "Oh, yeah, I heard you trying to do that. I heard they weren't going with you." And it's,
Yeah.
it's such a journey, and you learn so much about yourself in it. And I love the work you're doing and the way you're supporting podcasters and you're, endorsing people to use their voices because our voice is such a powerful tool. It's our vibration personified. It's our energy, breathing air and out in the world, and it can change everyone. It can change a life. It can change a trajectory. One idea can create a completely new world. And I think podcasting is it's such a gift that we've figured this medium out and this time space reality. And I applaud you for the work you're doing.
Thank you so much for saying that. That absolutely means a lot.
You're welcome.
And also, thank you for creating your podcast. I will make sure to link it in the show notes as well. But can you share where people can find you and the podcast online?
Yep. You guys can head to amberlilyestrom.com, and it's my website with all the things. The podcast link is there, but it's on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and all the things. You'd have to ask my husband, but all the places where there are podcasts, and it's Ignite Your Dream with Amber Lilyestrom. And I'm also on Instagram. I love Instagram. It's my favorite place to hang out. So I'd love to connect. DM me, follow, let me know that you listened. I will love to hear what your thoughts were about this. I'd love to hear about your podcast as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you for listening. I'm sure this conversation with Emma was super valuable. I learned a lot and I also really enjoyed it, which is, one of the most important things I think in recording these episodes is also to enjoy it. And yeah, thank you for all your advice today, Amber, and for coming on the show. Really appreciate it.
You bet. Thank you.
All right, that's it for today's episode. Need some help to get your podcast off the ground? Not sure where to start and what to focus on? Go to thepodcastbabes.com to schedule a call and learn more about our podcast launch and production services. See you next week.